Hello, insatiable listeners. We have now concluded our season 9 of Fiery Fertility. I have heard from so many of you how much you love the season. And if you haven't listened to season 9, I highly recommend you check it out, whether you're in the market for kids or not. It's really a look into our feminine power and how to access that through nutrition, our healthcare choices, and owning our story. We are now on hiatus between seasons, and I'm on maternity leave. I will be back on January 15th with a brand new season 10, which will be a crash course in truths with food. We will look at the root causes of why we can't lose weight and how addressing these root causes, which aren't about willpower or discipline, can make us feel back in control of food, get off the all or nothing roller coaster, get us to stop monitoring ourselves all the time, and trust ourselves when the dessert cart comes. All with a main course of self-compassion and self-acceptance that doesn't have to mean resignation if you aren't comfortable in your body. When you can accomplish this freedom and consistency, weight loss can be a side effect. I'm so excited to share this season with you. And Truths with Food, my signature boutique group program, will begin in March 2020 for another round. In the meantime, enjoy these popular Insatiable rebroadcast episodes to help you thrive during the holiday season and set you up really well for 2020. Can you believe it? It's 2020. All right. I look forward to reconnecting in the new year. You know, battling food in your body doesn't work. You want to love and accept yourself. And because you're insatiable, you want results too. And wouldn't you know, you bring the same intensity to your life, wanting to maximize your time, potential, and experiences you have here on this beautiful and wondrous planet Earth. Fair warning, it will be a roller coaster, but for those insatiable, that's your prime time to thrive. We're here to say yes to the hunger of wanting it all. I'm your co-host, Ali Shapiro, a health coach who helps people end the losing battle of dieting and find a truce with food.
And I'm Juliette Berg, nutritionist, fitness expert, and the co-owner of Unite Fitness Studio franchise.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Insatiable Podcast, the #1 blind spot to healthy weight loss. Are you planning to lose weight in the new year? If so, you won't want to overlook the linchpin that 90% of people overlook when deciding how to lose weight. Is it any surprise the failure rate corresponds with this percentage? If you want lasting results this year, this is the episode for you. So excited we're talking about this today, Juliette.
This made me want to go dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. You know what it is, so. But before we do, what's up in your world?
I am getting ready to go to New York City tomorrow. I'm taking a friend of mine, and we're just going to have a nice excursion there. And of course, it's going to be total fitness centric because that's what I do.
Is she into fitness, or are you making her into fitness?
Oh no, she's totally into fitness. She's a trainer as well. But we're going to be taking classes from 2 of the instructors that are on the new Bravo TV series called The Workout New York. So it's a reality show about a bunch of trainers in New York City and, you know, them living out their dreams in the fitness world and the cutthroat industry that is, you know, training in New York City, which I did for many years. So it's really fun. And it's definitely total garbage television, but I've been watching it every Sunday night. I've been DVRing it.
What classes are you going to take?
So they both instruct at Barry's Boot Camp.
Oh, is this your first time at Barry's Boot Camp?
I have been many, many, many times in many places. So,
do you think it lives up to the hype?
It depends on the class.
The instructor?
It depends on the instructor, but it depends on the class too. It can be a little hectic. It's 50 people in one room. So sometimes if the class is full, you just feel like you're fighting for a spot on the floor, you know, like doing a push-up with like, you know, your elbow touching another person's elbow. It can be like really hectic in there.
So is it Barry's Boot Camp or is that New York City? Because to me, that's what sounds like New York City.
Right? I know. I guess it depends. It depends, right? Because I went to Miami and it was the same thing in Miami. You know, they're very popular. They're really popular classes. So
That's interesting. So I did something kind of becoming more popular the other day, and it have you heard of the sensory deprivation tanks that are popping up?
I have. In fact, I've done that before, once before.
Okay, but I bet you are not going to be in the newspaper in a bathing suit in one, which I
Oh,
am.
wow. Are you? So were you like a guinea pig for this, or why? How did you get that?
Well, I moved here to Pittsburgh and I was like, I need to find like-minded people. And in my neighborhood, there's a flotation spa called Levity, which is really wonderful. And I went and I loved it. And then I went twice, I went again. And then Dave, the owner, emailed me and he's like, hey, the Tribune Review, which is the major newspaper here, is doing a story. Would you mind if they talk to you? And I was like, no, I love it. So the reporter calls me and I like tell her why I do it. I talk about the magnesium and how like, just like soaking. So for people who don't know, sensory deprivation tank is you basically, you float in like thousands of pounds of magnesium, of Epsom salts, which is magnesium. So you relax and you basically float, and all this stimulation from the outside world. You're in a dark tank. It's quiet in there, and you just are it's sensory deprivation, and you relax in a way that, you probably can't anywhere else. So I explained to her, like, she's like, why do you do this? We had this big informal interview. And then not informal interview, but you know how when the press talks to you, it's like, da da da. And so then she's like, oh, so I want to get you going into the tank. And I was like, what? I was like, well, you have to be naked in the tank. I was like, and she was like, well, no. She was like, yeah, but would you mind like putting on a bathing suit and we can film you, or we can take a picture of you? And I was like, and it's really interesting because some of my clients are like, Allie, do you really have a truce with food? Like, do you really not care about food or like have any issues with it? And I'm like, I don't. And I really feel comfortable with my weight, and everything. And then like, I felt like this was like, how comfortable are you? Because while I'm comfortable, I'm also not someone who's like an exhibitionist, and I don't have a lot of myself on social media. Like, it's just not something. But in the end, I was like, sure, why not? Like, it was like I wanted to say yes to it because I was just like, and I didn't do any major crazy working out. In fact, I couldn't even work out because of this arm thing that I have going on, this nerve thing that I have to figure out. And I didn't do any cleanses. Like, I'm like, oh, how far I've come, and they came and they took a picture. I haven't seen it yet, but the photographer was like, this is a really beautiful shot. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I don't know if he really felt that way, but he was, just trying to calm me down. I wasn't like nervous, but I was just like, okay.
I mean, anytime you're not wearing a lot of clothes, you're exposed in some way. So no matter what kind of body image issues you have or don't have, I think that anybody would just feel a little bit exposed, like being almost naked. Now, were you in a one piece, a tankini, a bikini? What were you rocking in there?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I only have a bikini. I've been moving around so much, and like, I didn't have a chance to like go out and buy a bathing suit. Like, I don't even know where I would get one here. I'm not a big shopper, so it's always like, a little of a like, well, I gotta go find a bathing suit and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I was in a bikini like November. Haven't seen the sun in like 5 months. So yeah, but it was interesting because I was like, I actually just don't care. I mean, I care, right? And I was like, look, and the reporter was like, you look fine. I'm like, no, I'm not someone who's like, oh my God, I feel fat. But I also didn't want like the first press exposure of me in Pittsburgh to be in my bathing suit.
So do you go often to do sensory deprivation, to float, or?
Well, yeah, the reporter asked me the same thing. She's like, how often do you do this? And I mean, I said to her, in an ideal world, I would probably go every other week. But, I was like, I said to her, are you a freelance writer, or, do you work for a paper? And she's like, no, I'm freelance. I'm like, so you work for yourself. So that like life is very hectic. You're always like, your schedule, people think you have your own schedule, but your schedule is really dictated by clients and when your website decides to go down, it's like, so I've been trying to go about once a month. I think it would be great if I could go twice a month, but it's great. It's like a meditation time for me because I'm not someone I believe in meditation. I get it. Do I do it? No. So
is it 90 minutes? The session?
It's 60.
Okay. Cause I did a 90-minute one.
Oh my God. 90. How was that?
That's what they offer. The flotation spa that I went to, they offer their 90-minute sessions. I mean, I've only done it once. Was it my favorite thing? No. Was it a really good experience? Yes. I would do it again, but I'm not motivated to do it again. It was, but I think part of it is just how expensive it is. Does it motivate me to do it again? If it was more cost effective, then I would do it more regularly. But for the amount that I was spending, which is as much as a massage, which is like, where it feels so good when it's happening, I would rather spend that kind of money getting a massage. So
I totally get that. I actually got a bundle at the flotation, but it was like a special. So I didn't pay full price. So I totally, price is always something I have to be mindful of.
They could drop the prices down on those float spots for what they are offering. But that's a side note. But
the sanitation that goes into it is really expensive. I mean, I saw like the back end of it and how you have to make sure the water, so it's
in a pod. What did yours look like? Because they're very different. Like mine was very much a tank. It was a metal tank with like with a door above you that you pull down and close. And there wasn't a lot of space in there at all. If you floated too far to one side or the other, you would hit the wall. So I know there are many different ones.
Yeah, mine was, it wasn't like a vertical tank. It was horizontal. And it was just like lying in like the ocean water, except you didn't have to worry about jellyfish or like rocks or anything like that.
So I have a trainer at one of my studios, and he is super into floating. And he's the one who actually, for my birthday, he got me a float to try. So, because he was trying to, get everybody to do it. And he has done 5-hour floats.
I am not that person. I mean, why don't you just go on a 10-day meditation at that point?
He claims that it just is such a spiritual, awakening experience and, transformative. And so if try it for listeners out there. I always try something new, you know what I mean? Especially if you're not into formal meditation. I think floating is actually a really, really great thing to do. I felt so relaxed when I left. Like my body I definitely had that body high when I left. Like every muscle, and it's probably from the magnesium, was so loose, and I was just like, I don't care about anything right now,
Carlos came with me once because he had a session, and we walked out of there and we were like giggling, and it was like we walked there, you walked up the hill, but then on the way down, it was obviously downhill. And we were like kind of like laughing because we were like walking faster down the hill than we normally do. And we were like, this is hysterical because we're both so kind of like, I don't want to say anxious, but we're both intense people. So we were like, wah, wah, wah,
Really?
Yeah. So let's get to today's episode because floating is great and everything, but I bet most people, and I remember I always felt like a cliche and was frustrated, but I still put weight loss on my New Year's resolution list when I was struggling with food. And a recent study, I think this is perfect timing, a recent study came out, and it was done by the Orlando Health Center in Florida. So they're a hospital system down there, and they commissioned a national survey of 1,000 people. And I'm not sure how the survey was set up or the demographic of people, but the results about what people think it takes to lose weight and their barriers came back pretty similar to what I see in my practice. And I'd love to, when I tell you the results, Juliet, if you see the same thing. So here's what, and most people missed the number one thing, which we're going to talk about today. And it's what the most of our episode is on. So the results came back, and this is what people said. 31% of Americans think a lack of exercise is their biggest barrier to weight loss. 26% thought it was what you eat. 17% said the costs of a healthy lifestyle. 12% said the necessary time commitment. But only 1 in 10 thought the psychological well-being or the relationship to food was a factor. And Diane Robinson, who has her PhD and is a neuropsychologist and a program director at integrative medicine at Orlando Health, right? I'm sure Orlando Health was trying to get themselves in the press. She said, that's not surprising. She said most people focus almost entirely on the physical aspects of weight loss, like diet and exercise. But there is an emotional component to food that the vast majority of people simply overlook, and it can quickly sabotage their efforts. So I want us to spend some time today talking about what do we mean by a relationship to food. I asked a couple people in my Clean Eating Reboot group what they thought it meant, so we have some concrete examples. And then maybe we can also talk about it in relation to you being allergic to the holidays. But what do you think? Like, what do you think of those results?
I think they're spot on. I think that the 31% of Americans think that a lack of exercise is a barrier. Well, I can tell you right now that there is not a lack of exercise in my world where pretty much 90% of my clients are avid exercisers, hardcore exercisers, and that's not the problem. It's not that they're getting a lack of exercise and why they're not seeing results. And as far as the part about, what they're eating, I mean, yes, there's a component to it, but yeah, I think there's so much more to this with the emotional connection to food and your body and how you view food and the all or nothing mentality that a lot of us have with food. I think that there's such a barrier for people when it comes to seeing weight loss results.
Yeah. And I think too, when you say even as I was outlining this episode, and it's something I work on every day with clients is relationship to food. And I'm like, what do people even think that means? Some of my clients know they'll use the language, I stress eat. So they know they use food when they're stressed out, or they know they use it when they're tired. But I think what's interesting is that's the habit. But underneath that is the way that they're relating to the stressors in their life, right? They either feel like a lot of people turn to sugar or carbs, which we talked about all in episode 3 of Good or Bad Carbs. But they're turning to carbs because it gives them stimulation. It almost lifts their mood to deal with the stress, right? If you feel like you have to plow through work or that you have to go through a meeting that's going to be difficult, isn't it so fun to just grab some M&Ms and it's almost like not the same thing as a drug high, but it's oh my God, you're fueled by this sugar.
Yeah. And the same thing goes for if you're coming off of a really long day where it's just been decision after decision and a lot of stress, and you get home and you just want to numb out and relax. And sugar is a really, really easy way to do that, or any kind of carbohydrate that is going to give you that same kind of stimulation that sugar does.
Yeah. Or what I used to say, and a lot of my clients say is I deserve this. And so the way that is interesting is that they're looking for reward through food, right? The relationship there is that food is a reward. It's a symbolic substitute for that. And it also is kind of a mirror for how people relate to their lives, right? Push really hard. And then we all want some gold stars for surviving versus, versus what I think this indicates is that we feel often, we're sacrificing, or that we, in our day-to-day life, the relationship is more than just seeing food as a reward. It's seeing that the rest of our life feels very sacrificial, right? Which is this idea if I work hard, I will be rewarded.
Yeah. That's why weekends are so triggering for people.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Over and over again, I hear, I'm so good on point, Monday through Friday, but Friday night.
Yeah.
Through Sunday, it's just, I'm a hot mess. And that's that whole thing about you're pushing so hard. You're trying so hard, and then you want a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. You deserve to just go off the rails, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I want to talk about today in terms of what do I do, with this idea that I have to pay attention to my relationship with food. And, I asked some people in my clean eating reboot, I said, when you think of relationship to food, what do you think of? And one woman said, how do I transfer my feel good vacation cookie mindset to celebrations? So she was saying that actually on vacation, because she has time, she's relaxed, she really again, she feels good. So she wants to continue feeling good and cooks and eats really well.
I hear that a lot from clients going away on vacation and actually losing weight.
Yeah, because change your environment.
There's two sides to it. There's the other part too, where it's I went on a cruise and I gained 7 pounds in 7 days, right?
Right.
So,
and this is because what I want to talk about is that people think that people think that they can't control themselves around food, or that they're a good or bad, they're really a bad eater who's trying to be good, right? And the reality is that we are all the same person. We can, in my clients are people who can control themselves at work. They get good grades. They're responsible. They're law abiding citizens, right? But then there's certain conditions that make them good and certain conditions that make them want to eat badly. And I think this is so important, especially if you look at all the psychological research. I mean, women especially, right? If we have a bad eating day, we're bad versus made bad choices versus if we're good, then we also think, oh, I'm good and I got to keep this up. Rather than seeing that there's certain triggers that we're actually the same person. And it's kind of, it's figuring out the environmental triggers that turn you into it, as my clients would say, good or bad. Another one I want to talk about, that one of the women in the clean eating reboot group said, my issue is the cortisol and stress eating from living in the same house as my ex-husband. So this is a perfect example of right now, there's some conditions that have changed that have brought about stress, right? And while stress on the surface seems like it's the issue, it's how we're relating to that stress that really determines the food choices. So that's what I want to talk about today.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, so what triggers do you see for this?
Yeah. So, and I'm so, I am such a Dr. Brene Brown fangirl. Are you familiar with her work?
Love her.
Yeah. Yes. She is amazing. For everyone who, if you haven't heard about her, please go look at her TED Talks. They went viral.
Come on our show.
Yes. Oh my God. I might pass out.
I live for the day for that.
I know. I'm not really into celebrities and stuff. I'm more like, oh my God, she's an amazing researcher. Like, I'm such a dork. So her work is on vulnerability, and what's great is she's given us language and stuff, to talk about vulnerability. What I see is that people don't see how their vulnerabilities are showing up in their lives. And this even happened to me. Like, I realized I've kind of isolated myself from sharing, what I'm working on with my health in the past couple of years of what I've gone through with my newsletter list. I didn't even realize I was doing it. It was just like a gradual pulling back. But there's certain triggers that cause all of us to feel vulnerable. No one is immune to this. And what's really, fascinating about anxiety or stress eating, which is often why people, or, to your point, you say you feel allergic to the holidays. You said that in episode 3. So we can talk about this relating to try to figure out what conditions make you feel that you want to overeat at the holiday or at Thanksgiving and Christmas. But what's really fascinating about anxiety and stress is that it's often not the anxiety or stress that causes us to eat, but it's feeling defenseless in the face of it, that there's nothing we can do. So that's actually, and I think, and you can, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I see with my clients and myself, I actually thrive when I'm challenged. Okay. When it's a self-chosen challenge, right? Most of us, I think, resiliency and creativity, we actually thrive in those situations, but it's when that same tension feels like we don't have any skill set around that then it becomes a vulnerability. So does that resonate? Do I need to clarify? I mean, sometimes I get stuck in my head, so let me know.
No. I think that definitely resonates, and correct me if I'm wrong. But the way that I'm thinking about it, just on a personal standpoint, is when you are thriving in something that you're passionate about and you're connected to, and maybe it's challenging, as are many things that are worth it in your life, right? They're going to be challenging and exciting and scary all at the same time. But if it's something that, it's something that it's yours, it's self-created, then that's a different thing than it's something that is almost a pressure, like you're doing it for somebody else, or it's not really something that you're passionate about. It's probably your job. You're working for somebody else. Even though you're trying to be as good as you can and as excited as you can about certain projects, if they're really not your own, it's a totally different energy that you're bringing to the table. And I'm thinking about that just from a standpoint of, I have 2 business partners. So not all of, my fitness business is self-created. So when it's something that I'm given as a task that just supports the business side of things, that isn't maybe the thing that really excites me, I do feel defenseless sometimes. And I do notice, these patterns of, I'm just going to, for me, it's like, I'm going to take a nap. Maybe for other people, it's, I'm going to have some M&Ms.
Yeah. For me, it's like, I'm going to skip working out and just keep working.
I've noticed for me, it's napping in the past as my business is really ramping up and we're becoming more successful. And there's just a lot more work and there's a lot more pressure and deadlines. I have noticed this defense mechanism I have, which is I'm going to lay down. I go to sleep. It's the strangest thing. I mean, it's not strange. I know what it is. I mean, is that a healthier habit than some others? Sure. But it's still a defense mechanism. And I think a lot of us use food in that same way.
Yeah. And what is so interesting about really understanding your relationship to food, and again, knowing that it's conditions, is that so many of my clients have struggled for decades right? That the story is, no, I just really love food and I really am out of control around food, or I just feel crazy around food. And that story has worn away so much self-trust that the skill set that they actually need, it has atrophied, right? Uh-huh. They had it a long time ago, but now that food has taken that. So you have two things that need to happen is you need to develop whatever the skill set is around your vulnerability. And then you also have to, which is going to be a little bit, uncomfortable, but then also know what your defense mechanism even is. And, you were talking about, as your business ramps up and everything, when I think, and that's like long-term thing. But when I think about the two women in the reboot, how do I transfer this, help feel good mindset to celebrations, right? There is something in those celebrations, and it could be, and here's where it gets tricky, and it could be different triggers at different celebrations that make her feel defenseless, right? And then with the woman who has to live in the same house as her ex-husband, right? No one would choose to go through a divorce. No one would choose these conditions. So to your point, when it's not something that you would choose or something that is you really feel is driving your agenda, you feel even more defenseless. And I know, what I've discovered over years was so much of my eating was feeling defenseless from having gone through cancer. It was kind of like, oh my God, like I'm defenseless against life. And rather than develop some resiliency around that, I tried to be skinny because I thought that was healthy. That's what I equated with healthy. So I had good intentions, but because I was so young and the culture supports, right? Then you're like, oh, the culture is telling you that being thin is the answer, that I didn't develop the skill set that I really needed. And I share with my clients, and I guess I'll share here, like I feel like building my business has been the best thing to help me transform my relationship with food because I am forced to deal with failure. I mean, not failure, but like not getting it right out of the gate, right? Uncertainty. I have to deal with conflict, like all this stuff that never I really had to work on before. And nor did I know it was related either. So I often think it's for people who are listening, it's in situations where you wouldn't have chosen them personally. It doesn't mean that they're inherently bad, but that tends to be where what I see with my clients is they stick to what they're good at. They hate feeling like beginners, like I do as well. But that tends to be when they're triggered the most with food. They feel like what's been asked of them at work is too big. They, something bad in their life has happened, or they're starting their own company or something, right? It's this new territory. So Juliet, if you had to sum up one word with how you relate to food, especially in the past, I know it's changed now, you nap now, but what in the past? Like if someone would have asked you that, would you have even had language for it?
It's complicated. That would have been how's your relationship to food? It's complicated. That's probably what I would have said.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this for myself. And in the past, what I would say now, at the time, I thought I was highly self-aware. But what I would say now is that I was highly monitoring my food, but no awareness. So again, I was highly monitoring it, but there was no awareness about what that meant beyond good and bad.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was a little different. I had awareness, but I had too much knowledge about food and I had read too many books and I had also seen too many therapists and I was actually overloaded with awareness to the point where I couldn't even listen to my own soul and intuition about what it was that I needed to be doing with food. It was just I was using it just to kind of like mask everything.
Yeah, I guess I should say I was in the same boat. I had read so much, but what I meant was I was monitoring myself being good or bad versus really being aware of why I was being good or bad. Like, so I thought I was so self-aware. I was into self-help. I had been to therapy, right? Like I kind of thinking, oh, I know myself, it's like, no.
You thought you knew yourself, but then having those issues with food, then you probably thought I'm broken in some way, right? I can't fix this thing. Like, why do I have this issue with food?
Yes. Oh my God. I just with a client this week who said like, why can't I just fix this? And I said, because you're not broken. And
great answer.
Yeah. And she was like, what? She's like, no, I just really want to just figure this out. And I was like, you have to come at it from I am whole, or not necessarily I'm whole, because we have to work at that, but like I can trust myself to do this. And if I trust myself, I can experiment and I can look at it, right? Because if we feel like we can't even look at it and see ourselves and own the good and the bad, then we'll never get out of the gate. We'll continue to be what people call crazy, or trying to fix it. But so much of the healing process of how you relate to food is that you have to feel like you're the one in charge. And so it's a very nuanced line, but you have to become your own expert rather than just working with plans. So what I thought would be really great for this episode is I would love for just both of us to, because we work so much on the relationship, we have a very high awareness now of our own relationship to food and so much experience with clients. I'd love for us to just take these two women who have shared their examples and, what you would suggest for them, or what you would want to ask, or your perspective on someone comes to you and says, how do I transfer, my healthy, feel good vacation cooking mindset to celebrations? How would you approach that in terms of knowing that this is about their relationship to food?
And there, just to be, I probably want to ask a couple more questions about what they mean when you're saying celebrations. Or what are we talking about specifically when she was saying that to you?
Yes, social events. It's the holiday season. So going to social events, whether it's a potluck or there's, a group of people where you're supposed to be having fun with, who you're supposed to be having fun with.
Yeah, I guess I would want to dig a little bit deeper and just understand what it is that she's doing on vacation that is drastically, which I'm guessing, different from how she is interacting in her everyday life. Is she taking more time for herself? Is she slowing down? And I think that we probably have to transfer some of those vacation feelings into her real life by probably slowing down and taking more time and not overloading herself. Because I'm guessing that's what's going on. She's having more time just to breathe and have space, and she doesn't give that to herself in real life.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because I often say with my clients, I use the analogy, or is it metaphor, of a cell phone battery, right? And I always say, I've learned that there's tired Allie and inspired Allie, right? And tired Allie is what people would think of as their bad side, and inspired Allie is who you would think of as your good side. And if that battery is drained too low, you're the same person. But now that you haven't slowed down and had space, you are using food probably for energy or to reward yourself, all that stuff, right? Like I always say, life looks very different on 8 hours of sleep versus 4. It's the same thing, right? If your energy level, if your battery level's at a 4 versus an 8, you make completely different decisions.
Yeah. Or maybe even just to get through those awful holiday parties, you're eating your way through it because you're not enjoying them. That's also something to know about yourself. They're not for everybody, those parties, especially, if you're going to ones that you really don't have to go to. Yeah, how many of those social gatherings you can really go to.
Right. But then, yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then it's then this is exactly how you can see your relationship to food mirrors your relationship to life, right? How comfortable are people saying no, right? There's fear of missing out, fear of looking like you don't like the person, fear of looking like, you can't do it all, whatever it is, right? So it's oh my God, I'm afraid I can't say no to food because I can't say no.
I have learned to say no so much. And no is one of my favorite words. I like it better than yes. Because it's honoring myself and understanding my limitations. And it's okay to have limits. None of us have superpowers. And to think that we're a better person the more that we can do, that is the wrong mentality. We're a better person the more space that we allow ourselves so that we can be inspired Allie and not tired Allie.
Yeah. When I make plans, I'm always make them you're tired Allie, so that you actually, how much running around I think I can actually do. I'm stop putting on your green tea, fresh after breakfast, fresh after 8 hours of sleep lens on your day next week.
You have to know your limits. And there are certain periods in your life where you may be less social than others, depending on what's going on. You have to just gauge it as you go. But that's what I would want to I would give advice to that client would just, I'm guessing that that's what's going on in her life. She's running on a low battery, just pushing herself too hard. And then when she's on vacation and she's really more of her authentic self, which is probably a more relaxed, happy self, that she's able to make better choices with food. So we would have to, just find ways to translate that into her regular everyday life. So, so there's definitely some exercises that, she can practice. Saying no is one of them, just making more time.
Yeah. And I think how I would approach this, and I have more background information than you do. So and not a ton, but, what I shouldn't say I have more background information. I would say, given the way that I look at food and how when people ask these questions, how I look at it is I also see that sometimes people have a fully charged battery, and then something like a social celebration like that drains it instantly. Like their battery's not holding the charge. And so what I would ask her is, what is, given that she's going from vacation where she's probably, has more time and all that stuff. But I would also assume if you're going on vacation, the people that you are with, you tend to feel more comfortable and intimate with than the people at a social celebration. So I would ask, how are you being differently in this social situation compared to when you're on vacation? And that's what I would want to know, because, as part of coaching is, in coaching, we assume the client is resourceful. We assume that they are brilliant. And we assume also when you enter into a coaching relationship with someone, you assume the person wants to take responsibility for what they can do. And a lot of type A people like that, right? Even though sometimes, we have to do things we don't want to do. We at least we feel in control. So I'd want to know to her, what makes you feel vulnerable with people that you don't know as well? How do you think you have to be? And then what behaviors does that translate into? So for example, and I just wrote 2 long posts about this, about when you feel invisible and self-conscious with your eating. A lot of people, I see this with clients, either they have food allergies or they're trying to eat healthy, but no one around them is. And so they just, quote, go with the flow because they don't want to look like they are on a diet, or they don't want to feel left out from the group, right? And so what they do is they just, they don't bring the food that they need to the potluck, or they don't ask the hostess like, hey, do you have anything that's wheat free, or, or something like that. So always looking at how you're being with people who you don't feel as intimate. And intimate is not sexual. It's just that you feel you can be comfortable with. Yeah. And really say that. And so to me, that's kind of where I would go from questioning and saying, how are you being differently? And then what you think of our habits are really how you think you have to be in those situations. And so how can you try a new behavior next time you're in those social celebrations? It can feel just uncomfortable, but say to someone, I'm wheat free, so I brought my own dish or whatever, right? And so many times clients are shocked that it actually it isn't a conflict. People are like, oh my God, I've heard about all the GMOs and wheat, or you know what I mean? It starts a really good conversation, and that's how you actually lose the emotional tension around food, because you don't have to muscle your way through it. You don't have to pretend it doesn't exist or push it aside. You really just want to transform it. So that's a really concrete example of how we relate to food. And I think how people often sabotage themselves even when they don't want to be. They know they don't want to eat dessert. They don't feel like it. I hear this a lot with my clients. I actually didn't feel like it, but I didn't want to look like I was on a diet because I haven't lost weight yet. We've been working together for 2 weeks, and they're like, I haven't lost weight yet, and it looks like I'm failing. And there's all this subtext, right? The subtext, not really what's happening, but what we think, what I call, we have mind reading capabilities.
And a lot of times that fear of failure is creating failure, because you're sabotaging your success, because you're so afraid to fail that you keep just doing the same sabotaging, techniques that you've learned over and over again. So that you're never going to be successul with it, and with weight loss especially.
Well, and that's the irony, right? As I actually said this in an earlier podcast, and I was like, I didn't really explain that clearly, but the fear we usually have the most, we're already living with, right? So if you feel like, oh my God, people are judging me, right? Which means then am I going to be alone? Right? That's like the real worry, right? Will I be alone and judged? It's like, oh my God, how alone does it feel when you're with people, but you can't be yourself?
That's a great point. So here is a really like a tangible scenario for you, Allie, that I think you could help people with. So a lot of holiday parties, especially a lot of work holiday parties or catered holiday parties, free food everywhere, right? And people are feeling like they can't control themselves around the free food. And I think that this has to do again with like how they're feeling in the social setting, because food is a great way to just distract you from actually having to be present and make small talk with people. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you have any tips for people in that situation where maybe it's a corporate event, or, this could be any kind of, it doesn't have to be holiday, but it could be any kind of corporate event where there's free food everywhere and, and maybe you ate already, but it's just hard to not go around picking.
Yeah, this is great. So there would be two things that I would ask. First of all is, how are they defining free? So just because it doesn't monetarily cost money does not mean there isn't a cost to eating it. And I don't mean a weight gain cost. I mean, are you going to have trouble sleeping? Mm-hmm. Are you going to get heartburn? Are you going to then be hungrier after you eat? Right? If it's a blood sugar, like because I used to struggle with this too in the corporate world. And I was like, oh my God, it says it's free, but then I'm like hungrier afterwards. So I'm actually going to have to pay, then I go buy more food, right?
I think that for a lot of my clients, it's not even so much of a physical cost, but it's a mental, emotional cost that they feel so guilty afterwards.
Right. Yeah. And so that is that guilt and that I'm doing something wrong, right? I mean, that is definitely a longer term thing, that guilt and getting out of all or nothing. And because part of why people love this food this time is because what they say to themselves is, well, in the new year, I'm not going to be eating this. Right. So it's, and what's interesting is, so it's this all or nothing mentality that it takes a good, I run Truths with Food coming up in February. It's 4 months because it takes a while to wear away that all or nothing mentality. But part of what's driving that all or nothing mentality is people think they have to be perfect to get results. There's a big story within, or assumption within there. So when you're going to holiday parties, I think the big thing is, first, think about free, the cost of it, and really think to that. But then here's what I would say to my clients, because they're like, anytime someone says, I always do this, I'm like, you do not always do it. Like that, right? It's like in their mind, they're only remembering like how awful they are.
That's the story. That's the intense language that they're using around something. And you have to reroute that story. That's because that's not your story. That's the fictional story that you're making up.
Yes. So I would ask people and, okay, I would say, when was a time that you were out and you made healthy choices? And it's pretty amazing that people remember that. They will remember that if you ask them. And I'm like, what was it about that time? Again, what was it about the conditions? I did this with a client the other day. She has all these parties coming up. She's like, well, I know I got 8 hours of sleep. To your point, slowing down and resting, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you need to go to parties rested. So practically, if the party, say the party is, 8 o'clock at night, right? Or when are work parties? Like right after work, or what? Say it's right after work. If it's right after work and you know that you're tired, know that you're going to spend less time there, that you're just going to leave early so you can get sleep. Oftentimes, if we think we have to stay the whole time, again, our battery, even just the mental, like, oh my, dread drains our batteries. If the party starts at 7 or 8, find something that restores you ahead of time, if that's what works for you. So looking at the conditions underneath that enable you to make good choices. Another thing that's huge for my clients that they're shocked at is if they can find one person. They do not need to make small talk with everyone, but if they can find one person where they can have a genuine conversation with, it changes everything. I had a client in Truths with Food 2 years ago. We were talking about this connection concept and how when we isolate ourselves or we feel lonely, we eat more. And she was saying how she was on this work trip, and she was someone who like loves sugar and sweets, or so she thought. Although once she figured out her blood sugar, she realized that was half of it, but we were still working on the emotional stuff. And she was at this event and she met this woman and they ended up talking about like all this random stuff. And she really brought kind of the more personal side to herself at work for the first time. And she's like, I totally forgot about the brownies.
I was just going to say, when you are really connecting with somebody over a meal, notice how little you eat, or how, or the difference in how much you eat, or how much you even notice your food because you're so engaged with the person.
Exactly. And, I'll ask clients even sometimes I'll say, hey, if we're working on portion control, tell me a time when you had stuff left on the plate that you were full. It's like, oh, when I go out with my girlfriends, we talk so much and I'm just like full. Like I always get a bag wrapped up, right? Versus, oh, work lunch, work lunch, people are monitoring themselves a lot more, but then they'll eat in the afternoon. But yeah, those are the conditions. You don't need, I'm so extroverted. I like thrive in these situations. My husband, Carlos, introvert, right? So it's been interesting in our marriage and our relationship because he is like, how long ahead of time? He's like, how long are we going to stay? And sometimes I'll stay longer. I'm like, all right, let's, I'll take, especially when we lived in Philly, I'm like, I'll just go home on my own, and he's like, all right, cool. So we had that agreement before we went. But a lot of my clients find relief not staying the whole time at the event, right? Or feeling restored ahead of time. Maybe they need to get outside a little bit. Maybe they need to go home and take a nap. But starting to think about the conditions that enable you to thrive. And just think about when you make great choices, right? A lot of people will say, to your point, oh my God, I make really good choices during the week. Then the weekend I go crazy. Or some people think, so if that's the case, it's like, okay, I'm going through this like sacrifice, push, reward model. So what if I go to the party? What if I don't, a lot of people won't eat all day, right? All right. What if I actually don't arrive at the party starving, right? Set myself up really well and then know I can have one or two things. And sometimes putting that pressure off. Some of my clients don't have problems with moderation there. Some do. It all depends on the person. But that I would start with thinking, part of why people do well on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, not the weekend, is also because their energy is depleted, right?
100%. Yeah. You're like, okay, I'm starting off fresh, from a weekend where I had time to slow down and relax. And then you're recharged Monday, Tuesday. By Wednesday, on that hump day, it's like, OMG, I'm drained again. And then you're like, I need to reward myself. I need that glass of wine. I need that ice cream tonight, and then, so really Saturday and Sunday turns into more of a like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah. And so often, my whole master's thesis was how we put weight loss into this battle story. And we think, oh, it's just this, we're just saying I'm tracking points, I'm doing boot camps, but that actually creates a feeling of how we think we have to be. And so a lot of people think they have to gear up. But what I'm really telling you is you have to soften and tune down. And that is actually the productive action that helps you with those parties and helps you with things. And when you soften instead of trying to gear up, things change. And, even, with I was talking about the one woman in my Facebook group who is living with her ex-husband. What I would ask her there is, okay, obviously this is not ideal, right? Like, let's acknowledge that. And I have no idea why they're, breaking up. But when the things were working with your husband, how were you in that situation? What was different? And I bet if she were to answer that, it would be a softening rather than, a hardening or a defensive mechanism. But there's always ways that we can be. And part of this, again, is not about someone winning or losing or us being good or bad, but it's about saying, what do I really want here? Right?
Yeah.
What is my end goal at this party? Is it to just eat my way through it? Is it to numb out? Or is it to like have a good conversation and then head out early and have a win-win situation? So I know I kind of jumped to the client example and this client didn't ask for coaching, so she doesn't have to take my advice, right? But I just want to give I thought it was a great concrete example of how, okay, stress does fuel my appetite, which she talked about in the group. And this is a stressful situation, yet there's still, if I can just soften and turn down the stress, even one or two notches, I don't need it all to go away. I just need to feel like I have a skill set here so that I don't feel so defenseless and so so exposed, which people often feel at holiday parties, especially if they don't know a lot of people or it's work, etc. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. And let's not forget about self-created stress with food, like how stressful it can be to micromanage your food all the time. Recently I was working with a client and we were going over her food diaries, and all the food that she was saying she was eating were just so bland. And they were really clean, healthy foods, but it was, like a plain, organic Greek yogurt, nothing in it, just plain, everything was just so bland, not a lot of flavor to it, not a lot of excitement there. And it's no wonder that this particular client felt like on the weekends, she just needed to go crazy and eat kind of whatever she wanted. And then it was like, back on Monday, starting over again. But that is really stressful right there when you're really stressing yourself out with the kinds of foods that you're eating, when you're not enjoying your food at all. Do you find that?
Oh my God. Well, that's what I was talking about. If I would to sum up my relationship in the past, it was self-monitoring. Yeah. And I think this is the big thing in my work with my clients. I am not one of these people that's like, I want them to find the medium between, eating whatever they want and then being deprived. Right. And part of getting there is knowing what to measure. And people think that if they're thinking about food a lot, that it's going to lead to better action or better choices. And it actually does the opposite. So they think like, oh my God, I'm paying attention. I'm monitoring myself. I'm all this stuff. And it's so many mental gymnastics that they get exhausted. And when you emotionally are exhausted, that's when the excuses start to come in. Well, I'm just going to have one glass of wine, right? Oh, wait, but I'm going to get the 8-ounce glass instead of the 4, right?
Think about how much mental energy it takes when you're thinking about food that often. I remember one of my aunts said to me a long time ago, if you would only spend half the amount of energy that you spend thinking about food and the size of your ass, you would be like, a millionaire by now. You'd be the CEO of a company, like you're so determined and your mind is always churning, but you're not using it for productivity. And I was like, oh my God, you are so right. I'm holding myself back from what my gifts are, by just thinking about food all the time and my body. It's like a waste of mental energy.
Right. Well, and that's how we kicked off the call, right? Like people act like you are determined and you thrive on a challenge. But with food, many people feel defenseless because they're not looking at the conditions that cause them to feel so defenseless. Rather, they just stick to the monitoring, thinking like, okay, I'll figure this out eventually. This is something to fix. This is a logic problem. When it's not a logic problem, it's an emotional one. It's how are we relating, right? How do we relate to food? How are we relating to the situation that we need to pay attention to? So yeah, it's all about the mindset and understanding we're the same person, right? You can be a determined person in a great way, but for many of us, if we aren't self-aware, which I was trying to explain before, but I don't know if I was clear, our strengths can become weaknesses and they turn on us. So I think it's so important. Like people often think like I need the mindset and like the right mindset, which you do, but rather it's not the right mindset. It's moving along the continuum from self-monitoring to self-awareness about how you're using food. So 100%. Yeah. So I think, the big takeaway for people listening to this is like, think about what conditions are present when you are eating well. If you have a certain situation that's coming up and you're nervous about, think about that exact same situation one time when you were successful. And what did you have to do? Often clients think it's these like big changes, but it's like these little things of like, oh my God, taking a nap, life looks very different, right? What changes when you're eating poorly? What storm brews comes in? Is it people that you're not as comfortable with? Is it that you don't feel comfortable saying that you're dairy free or that you're looking like you're on a diet, right? And I have a post that goes into how to change this in more detail on my site at alishapiro.com/overeating and loneliness. And then the last one is, how can you take responsibility to change those conditions? So thinking about what your end goal is, maybe not, if it's a party, what's my specific end goal at that party? And not just food wise, right? Like, who do I want to talk with? What would be interesting to to do tonight, right? Or if there's like some of these holiday parties, like there's activities or there's dancing, like what do I really, rather than what will look good, what do I need to feel good is a really great often question. So, and two, just kind of as a little plug, but in the new year, I'm going to have a quiz to help people identify what conditions help them thrive and which ones sabotage them. So it'll probably be available the second week of January, and I'll mention it on a podcast and officially announce it here. But this is really important. Yeah, there's 4 main patterns that I've seen over the past 8 years, and also, you know, looking at it through my coaching lens. So that's that. Do you have any more thing to add or anything else, Juliet, before we wrap up here?
I think just, you know, we are talking about mindset today, but I also think that what I was saying earlier about not having excitement in your diet, create more excitement in your diet. Have a little bit of chocolate throughout the day. Don't feel like you have to save it for a special occasion. It will make it so much better that you won't have to save it up. You won't feel that deprivation feeling. And that moderation is so key here when it comes to your diet, right? Like Ali was saying, we're not going for like deprivation. You know, we're trying to find like a middle ground here with food.
Yeah. And again, sometimes people are afraid to do that because they think they won't get results, but you don't have to be quote unquote perfect to get results. And Juliet, that is such a great point that you brought up about excitement in your diet, because, you know, I'm always looking at the metaphor, talking about how we relate to life is how we relate to food. People get so excited about weight loss, not because of weight loss, but because they think it's going to bring possibility. They think it's going to bring excitement to their lives. And sometimes it can. Hey, it feels great to feel good in your clothes, but you have to get the excitement in first for it to keep going. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's another huge pattern and why people pin so much on weight loss. They think, you know, their real life or their more exciting life is going to start there, but it can start now. It can start now.
Yeah. I mean, I have abs now. I didn't have abs then. This is, and it's like, it's really funny because people are like, oh my God, how do you have like a 6-pack abs? You must be on a crazy new diet. And I'm like, no, I just love food and I don't deprive myself, and naps, and and my body is responding in a really great way, and I'm not forcing anything. And would I love myself if I didn't have abs? 100%. And I think that's really what it all comes down to, is like loving yourself at any time in your life. But you're loving yourself because you're respecting your body and you're feeling good about the choices that you're making. And you're not waiting for something to make your life better. You know, you're living in the present moment.
Yeah, that's so important. And I often tell my clients, you know, oftentimes they resist what you just said, like the loving themselves, because they think that self-acceptance means resignation. And to your point, self-acceptance is basically you can love yourself and work on yourself at the same time. And in fact, I think learning what works for your body and learning, to your point, not what to force, but what, you know, I'm using the word soften into, but what is your body really craving? Not from the outside expectations, not from the self-monitoring, but from the self-awareness, the internal cues. That's how you can get results from self-acceptance, right?
Yeah. And just to wrap up here, I think Ali and I will definitely be doing a podcast on cravings, because there are many different kinds of cravings.
Oh my God, we could have a whole podcast dedicated to cravings.
Which we will. We'll break different cravings down for you. I'm craving chocolate currently, but you know. But
I'm actually craving a nap.
I'm always craving chocolate, so that's okay. That's just is one of my favorite food group. But
we'll have to do one then on all the good chocolates, because I just kind of get like 70% with almonds, and I realize I need naps more than chocolate.
Yeah. Well, we are so excited, everybody. Thank you for listening today. We have so much great content coming up, and we would love it if you could leave us a review on iTunes. And we have a little incentive going that we're going to be picking 2 people, one for Ali, one for myself. If you leave a review, we will pick 2 people that we will be diagnosing your food journals and kind of giving you some great tips. We'll do 30-minute consultations with you. So please go ahead and leave a review. Be honest about your review. We can take it. We promise.
Yeah. And yes, definitely for the month of January, 2 people will pick. And of course, connect with us on social media or by email with your questions. Juliet is at Unite. What's your Twitter handle?
Juliet Unite. Everything is Juliet Unite on. You can find me on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find Allie at Allie M Shapiro, and then you can also just check on our show notes for our emails. And please feel free to email us any questions, any comments that you may have. We are very excited to share our knowledge with you and hear your feedback. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Insatiable Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can connect with us on social media. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Juliet Unite, and Allie at Allie M Shapiro. M stands for Marie. Please feel free to also email us any questions. We would love to hear from all our listeners. You can reach us at Allie at allieshapiro.com and Juliet at unitefitness.com. We'll see you next time.